unlike many wildlife photographers, because I am employed with Nikon for 33 years, I do shoot. It's an addiction and it's habitual to me, and I do it 24/7, and I always get the comment, how do you do it all? You just fit it in. You just do it. And you'll see a little bit of that work in a bird program. I've been with Nikon for a long time. I've created Nikon's ambassador program. Lucas Gilman, in the back of the room, is going to be speaking on the main stage. And photography has been in my bloodline. It started with my dad, and you'll see a little bit about that. And I always love to open up with these words, impact, energy, and emotion. I think these are, we can talk about all the compositional rules, all the fundamentals of photography, f-stop, shutter speeds, exposures. But when it comes to a picture, if you can create a picture with impact, that really forces an energy level and really comes back with emotion, drives the viewer into seeing some kind of emotion or feeling an emotion, I think you've done your job as a photographer. Now, not all of these components end up in a photograph at the same time sometimes, and they're still effective. But man, when I hit these three things, or you hit these three things within a photo, I think you get people to react right away, they feel it right away, they see the picture, they understand it, they read it, and they're impacted by it. And that's the way I like to shoot. And this is called focus on flight. I am from New York. I spent 9 years with Nikon in California. But I started off here in New York, and maybe this story sounds familiar to some of you. My dad had a darkroom in the basement. And I went down, and he would listen to Wilf Carter and Slim Pickens and all his country stars. He actually had a radio station in Florida, but his hobby throughout life was photography, and did it through school, high school, college, and we had that darkroom in the basement. And all of a sudden, when I started to see this wet chemistry process, I was already going to school for art. I thought, wow, this is what I want to do. And my dad always inspired me to think a certain way, that it's one thing to know the answer to a question, it's the other thing to understand why. It's totally different to understand why. And this is really almost segues perfectly into bird photography, because you do have to study habits, behaviors, understand it. I am not a full-time, lifetime wildlife photographer or bird photographer. I went to a lake by my house, and I realized there were far more birds and species than just ducks and swans and Canada geese. I once said Canadian geese, and I got yelled at by somebody. It's Canada geese. So I don't look at myself as a perfectionist in this world, but I study, I work, I go back there. All of a sudden, it became my asylum. It became that place I went to, that a church, if you will, and I found my peace there. And it was quiet off a main road in Stony Brook, Long Island. Anybody know Stony Brook, Long Island? Clap for Stony Brook, man. And I used to live 15 minutes away, which is why I call it in my backyard. And through Nikon and through the things I have to do, I was a writer for Nikon World Magazine, and I had to shoot for articles, and we have so many online assets and websites and Learn and Explore where we teach and educate, and it's always so important. And you know, working for Nikon, I used to teach Nikon schools, so education has been a part of what I've done regardless of the other jobs I've held. And this is a shot, very simply, for an article that talked about teleconverters, when people didn't believe teleconverters worked. This is the Nikkor 600mm f4 with a 2x teleconverter. And this is an egret off of this lake, the inlet off of Stony Brook. So there's a little sanctuary, birds, there's a little island, there's a walking path called Avalon Park, but just down the road a little bit is an inlet that takes you out to the bigger water. And I find all of these opportunities to go shoot. I realized there were cormorants. I called them double-breasted cormorants until somebody corrected me that they were double-crested. This is the way you learn, though. Listen, I was not a genius. If you ask me about a 1005 pixel matrix meter and a 3D sensor flash system, I can tell you all about it. But I learned, and that's what I love about this, is the discovery. And as you know, you've heard this before, and I'm going to teach you or talk to you about a lot of fundamentals that if we sometimes just don't apply, like waiting for the right time of day. Instead of the cormorant flying away from the light, have the cormorant flying into the light, and then you see this beautiful green, teal blue eye, and you see the patterns around the eye, and that was done with a 500mm f4 with a D810 camera. I use a variety of cameras, and you'll see what I've sort of turned into or turned towards as things have gotten lighter and easier and more effective to work with, where you don't want to have to carry out for too long, because I could be hiking for 2 hours around this lake. Great blues, all different kinds of species of birds that I ran into and tried to understand the temperaments and the behaviors, and certainly love the egrets and love the heron, love the night heron. Some of them are a little more skittish than others. Wood ducks I've not really seen at the lake, and I went out there aggressively at the beginning of the season around April, and all of a sudden there were a couple of pairs of wood ducks. And ladies, I say this with all respect in the world, but when it comes to photographing ducks, The men have it. The men are the more beautiful of the species. I'm just saying, you'll see that, and I hopefully will. I see some anger. Don't. You'll see. But light, nothing changes when you change the genre of what you shoot. The quality of light is important, understanding the fundamentals, knowing what you're doing, getting to that place quicker so you can focus on what's happening in front of you, not worrying about camera settings. So I'm big on camera settings. And because I found this love of birds, I've sort of taken it away from Long Island and on different places and on different shoots, and was part of a tech supporting an ad shoot for the D500 last year down in Florida. We found some beautiful places. So I don't just do it in the backyard. It's become something I've done a lot. Once I was told, and I sort of bring this to everybody, and as it was passed to me, if you're not there, you can't shoot it. And there are times where I force myself to be there. There are times I've left myself going. Ron McGill, a Nikon ambassador from Zoom Miami, says it best: the most predictable thing about wildlife is it's unpredictable. And that's what you always have to remember. If you're not going to give the patience and the time to doing this, you may walk away too soon. My problem is I became so addicted to it, I always felt like if I took a step to turn away, I was going to miss something. And then an hour or two later, I'm still there, and that's probably why I'm single living in Levittown now. 33rd anniversary with Nikon, done a ton of different things. I'll just punch through this because I know it's a little off topic, but I guess I would consider myself a generalist like some of my favorite people, but a lot of the background I have turned into a lot of production work, from TV commercials to ad campaigns to a lot of stuff that I've done with cameras on set where we have to shoot, where I've done portraits for some of the bigger assignments for the publications that we've done online. Done a lot of great stuff with 360. And the 360 camera. And just recently had done something with the New York Mets where we took one of our 360 cameras, which I planned to take into wildlife, and we placed it around the ballpark several times, inside the locker rooms in different places, and created some footage that's played now at Citi Field. So people who come to the stadium can see this 360, immerse themselves in this 360 experience. I mean, technology is changing every day, and we have to adapt to it. And I became a director on this shoot. I've started to direct video campaigns for Nikon for different organizations like Disney. I did 4 videos for Disney. Right, Lucas? Wasn't that a great time? So really just getting immersed in all of this technology is just, has been amazing to me. Let's just, there we go. Producing DVDs. How many remember the transition of digital? And we didn't know what JPEG was. We didn't understand how to operate a RAW file. And that was part of a lot of the production work I did early on in producing DVDs for Nikon within the company. And I find that connection to the things that I love to do within my world and with my friends. And I love going to the Bronx Zoo. I know a lot of wildlife people say, zoo photography, is that really wildlife photography? It's captive. But there are a lot of opportunities to learn about the animals there, and I do that quite frequently. I shot with the D5600 at the same lake in Stony Brook. I would go out there year after year after year, constantly doing work in Stony Brook. Not once did I see a cormorant come up with a fish until I went back in the winter at a time that I typically didn't go. But too many years in photography, so I guess you could say I love things in flight. I love the way things move. I love those impact moments, the energetic moments, and I think that's what kind of turned me towards the bird photography, towards really introducing a love of the birds and the action. So remember I said those words: impact, energy, emotion, driving that kind of emotion from the viewer that's looking at the pictures. That's what I'm trying to do, create these opportunities and moments that you may remember. On the picture on the left was 9/11, very impactful, emotional. It was not a great home run shot, but certainly impactful. The impact of the energy, the horses here. So regardless of the photography, in this case it's going to be bird photography, I try to look for that kind of same impact. The Queen came to the Kentucky Derby. She could have cared less what the Prime Minister and her husband were saying at the time. 9/11, coming back to horse racing. Sometimes you realize it's not always about the big picture, it's about that smaller detailed picture or some other story that's going to go on there. The light, the beauty, the emotion. So you could see where there is a transition in my world where I started off in sports, got into a lot of rock and roll, and now I'm rolling into portraits. And I don't know if you're driven this way, and this is another thing I'd ask you to take away, is personal projects. When you emotionally connect to a project, you will go back time and time again. You don't know time. You don't understand the depth of the project or the distance or the length of time that project's going to go on. But if you love it, you will keep going back to it. Because every time you go back, as redundant as you think the pictures are going to be, you'll find something new. So you may not shoot as much, but you'll find that one little nugget or that one golden moment of excitement. I mean, I love the way we work with technology within the cameras and be able to change now saturation and picture control. And you can do a lot with the cameras, and we'll talk about that and things that I've discovered. I talk about eye contact in animals. My dog Bella. I go visit Bella all the time. We see a lot through the eyes and different moments, and here's a lot of travel stuff that I've done. And I'm just going to, again, keep trying to roll through this as quick as I can. A lot of portraits I do with people. This was for a group called Rescue Inc. And so trying to create the connection between subjects, which is what I'm trying to do with birds and landscape. What's the behavioral pattern? What's one bird doing to another bird or connecting with another bird? How are they behaving? How are they working? This is back with the D700 campaign. I always talk about getting down to the ground. And so, Nick Good, anybody know this man? You ever seen him before? Yeah. He shot a very famous picture of a Vietnamese girl running down the street after a napalm explosion. So like Lucas or my friends, I love to photograph my friends and people. Do a lot of work at the Ronald McDonald House these days. So this is another personal project of mine that goes well beyond the words personal project. It's not even a project. It's just a connection with a world that I just never thought that I could be a part of. Rock and roll, action, 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 action. So again, shifting a little bit off topic, and at that moment where I'd probably say I did cut this out of the program, but I launched the wrong program, so you're gonna get to see it anyway. But I'll get through it faster. I've been the house photographer at Jones Beach Theater for quite a while. Last 9 years. I was there last night for a festival. Don't ever go photograph festivals and then come speak in the morning after at a B&H OPTIC event, which is so amazing. But I made it and I survived. But always trying to find a different angle of point of view. Everybody feel this sometimes? You feel like you're being pedestrian. What I mean is you're taking the easy way out, or you're doing what everybody else is doing, or you're getting into moments, you know, that others are doing the same exact thing. Try to break away from it, and all of a sudden things start to change with your vision. Change your perspective by changing your point of view. How do you do that? You pick up your feet and you move somewhere else and try different things. So the birds in flight, the action took me to nature. All of a sudden the love of nature. I'm not a great landscape photographer by any means, but I love nature. One of the things I love about this picture is actually shot in black and white with a D750. You believe me? How did I do this? In the black and white monochrome settings in picture control, you actually have toning. So any silhouette situation, I can actually make whatever color I want as long as I can make it something that you believe in. Or I can make it fantasy. I can make it an illustration. You'll see how I do that with birds. So again, the things to walk away with: versatility, just being consistent, execution, but it's about relationships that you have. And it may sound weird saying that I have a relationship with birds, but I do. I have a love affair with this lake. I would lie about going home to be on time for dinner and not say that I was going to the lake. I would say I'm going somewhere else, because I was always afraid if I said I'm going to the lake, I'm going to get in trouble. Why? That was the question. You've heard this before as photographers by somebody else in your world. Why do you have to go back to the lake again? And then you clearly understand that your life needs to change because the person that you're with doesn't get it, unless they want you out. And they said, good, go to the lake. I heard that a couple of times. So the birds of Stony Brook. We were talking about this before, right? Hand-holding cameras and working with tripods, and there's so many different things that I would recommend. You certainly should have a monopod. You certainly should have a tripod. But I found that when photographing birds in flight and I come up like this, there's no tripod or monopod in the world that's going to move with me easily. So sometimes I bear the burden on my arms, and I will put the system down, wait for an opportunity, hope that nothing happens during that time when I'm resting. That was an 800 5.6. I also like to break away from the moments of again, that pedestrian point of view. I love backlighting. I love backlighting dark objects. I love fringe light. And in this case, the cormorant must have just tapped on the water, came up, and the water drops are flying with the cormorant. And so the impact of flight is what has caught me and what has caught my attention here. They have habits. We'll talk about the habits and where I go. But I know now, when a cormorant is a swimming bird, right, comes up with a twig, what happens? It's gonna fly. It's just a matter of moments, right? They're nesting, they're bringing nest parts up. And so to have that thought process. We always say this in sports photography. When you can anticipate what your subject's going to do, you'll be a much better sports photographer. When you know more about the behaviors of the subjects, it's going to work out that way. I love challenging shooting tight frames. There's very little cropping in some of these pictures, and then there's a ton of cropping in some where I just wasn't that close, which is why I would use the D810 for a while at 5 frames per second, although limited in speed. That resolution made me feel like with a converter on a long lens, I had even more cropping power. But then there are times when the light sits so low that a D5 is the choice, so I'll go to the D5 because I have the better ISO capabilities. Everything is a shift up, everything is a change up, and I know to build a system, I would think about it now building it as versatile as I can to cover as many conditions as I possibly could. But this is just recently, in April. I love the cormorants coming to land, and that's where I shifted over now to using the D500 because at 10 frames a second, with its resolution, and the ability to use lenses with converters, start doing the math. I'm not a mathematician, but your focal length all of a sudden increases to places that you could never get to before and hand hold. And just looking for different, again, I probably have a million pictures of birds with twigs coming out of the water. And I go back there and say, okay, I'm gonna go do this again. And you almost have to force yourself to do it again because something different's gonna happen. This guy comes up and he's got a stick that's so odd shaped. I mean, maybe the book is gonna be on sticks someday. Birds coming out of the water with sticks. I have no idea why I do this. But I will go away and venture away from the island now. And this was part of that shoot I was explaining before with the D500, where we actually went down to Orlando, a place called Blue Cypress, and we went to Gatorland. Anybody go to Gatorland? And all of a sudden I realized that I could actually use a 70 to 200 to photograph egret chicks, where I struggle on Long Island. And then that's the challenge though. That's my challenge. By staying at this place and trying to do the birds of Stony Brook, I am not gifted by egrets that come up and eat out of the palm of my hand or have nests right over a railing. So I got spoiled there for a little bit, but the moments these are the moments to me that are breathtaking. These are the moments that when I hope there was a reaction, you felt something, there was an impact to that, you feel emotion within this picture. Although the energy may be light, it's creating its own energy from that emotion. And then go back there again. This is all from the beginning of the year. This was from a few years back. I never really titled pictures, but I call this Holy Duck. And the reason why I call it Holy Duck is because someone in the office saw the picture, the wings are so angelic. And you know how stuff like this happens? You can't feel it here, because I wish I could turn the air conditioner all the way up. It was 10 degrees. I was getting ready for a shoot at the Bronx Zoo with my friend Julie Mahar. And I'm out there and I'm done. My toes are freezing. It's one of those things, you go in the car, your hands burn for an hour, and then all of a sudden they start to unnumb. And just as I was mentally done, a flatbed truck comes around the corner on Main Street. The back tire kicks the curb. Something in the flatbed truck went up and down, slammed down, and the birds went nuts. And you realize, I steal this expression from one of my favorite people's books, Joe McNally, the moment it clicks. You ever feel that feeling? You know what that means? That means when you've clicked the shutter, you know something's there. You know the impact of what you've just done is nothing that you've ever done before. And that's why I love that kind of a moment. But when you get there and you keep going back, sometimes the cormorants will come up out of the water and they won't come at you, they'll come off, and by the time they get you at a good distance to a shoot, they're off on another angle and it's not the same picture. So with an 800 5.6 and a D810, having that crop ability, that ability to crop, was phenomenal in a picture like this with a cormorant coming up with a stick. I wish it was a more magnificent stick or branch, but you know, I'll take the angle coming out because again, that water flying in the background is just so amazing. And you make the most of what you got. There are times I go out there and just the ducks, or it's just the swans, or the swans chasing the ducks, and just try to do some interesting and different things when the light changes or you try to be artistic. And I just do the best I can when I get out there. Cold winters, water patterns from different angles, you know, busting a little extra contrast in post-production. I do have to admit this, by the way, to every one of you, I post-produce my images. I do cropping, I do editing, I do burning, I do dodging, and I do clone out certain things that I just don't want in the picture. It's relative. I try not to. I try to do as much in camera as I possibly can, but, you know, to add a little saturation after the fact. I mean, that's why we shoot RAW, so we can work within the parameters of RAW and do different things to the files. To me, the limit is when it becomes unbelievable. When does a wildlife picture like this become unbelievable? When it's actually the bird is this tiny in this kind of frame and you cropped it so much and it may look good for the web. I don't live for the web, I live for print. So if it gets beyond that border of print or that capability of printing, then I'm well beyond that. Research, preparation, you have to know this, you have to know the town. I've studied the town, I've made friends with people. I know some of the homes in there because without stepping on property, I've knocked on doors and I just said, I'm here to photograph, do you mind? I had one guy say he owned the road out there. His house, he owned that road. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to walk, because there was no sign. It doesn't say it was his road. But instead of saying, well, too bad, it's my earth, I just said to him, I'm sorry, I didn't know. And as I'm turning to walk away, he said, oh, don't worry about it, you can stay here. I just want to let you know it was my road. Okay, well, you made a statement. So you know what I did? And I just had a bunch of extra metal prints that you go right to the wall with. I went home. Next time I came back, I knocked on his door and I gave him a metal print and just said, thanks for letting me on your road. And those kinds of relationships are what keep you going. So this is an area, this is where I was talking about, that little lake, and then it moves on to the inlet, and I am all over the place. And it took me years to figure out that I could actually go down to a road and come back on this other side to give myself some options to shoot from the inside here instead of the outside. So you learn and you discover. So that's a little closer view of the lake. I have hearts of my favorite places. This is a bridge that's very limited, but this is Joan's house. You know how I know it's Joan's house? Because I guess when you're out with a long telephoto, Joan says, hey, do you want to come on my property and shoot? Maybe you have a better angle. And I said, well, no, thank you for that. And I took her up on that. And you make friends within the neighborhood. This comes close. This is right off the road. There's a fence here. You step through the fence, or you're coming down this side here. And there's all kinds of, this is where all of the cormorants are living. This is where they're nesting. And then, you've got all of these other species, babies and chicks and all that stuff going on in here. And then they're all over the lake at different times of day. But this is where I found the other side, which I really love now because I could shoot back. The problem is you're shooting into a parking lot. You heard this in Photo 101. Your background is more important than your foreground. You have to scope things out to know what is it that you're going to photograph behind, because the last thing I need is a structure. I don't need a rectangle or a white roof on a house, or I don't need the reflection of a car in the background. So I worked my way around. I started studying tide pools to know when the tide was going to be up and down. Why would I do that? Because the feeding habits change. What are they feeding for? Are they going for worms if the tide's way down? Are they going for these tiny, I don't even know their names, little tiny silverfish to eat and pluck out of the water? And that makes, I get a little irritated too. My friends in Florida, I see them pulling, one bird pulled a little mini alligator out of the water. There's all kinds of stuff in Florida. I get worms and I get small fish, and every once in a while, like that cormorant you saw before, I get a bigger fish. Not much that happens, but I try real hard. But again, it's like I said before, watching the light, putting it all together, comes up with a branch, wait for it to fly through the light. But I know when that branch comes out of the water, when it comes up and they're just kind of hovering there, they're waiting. And then the wings start to go out. And then you feel it, and they're ready to take off. And they do it kind of it's slow motion after a while when you see it, but it works. But again, when that takeoff happens and you can anticipate it, that's when 12 frames or 10 frames a second is worth it, or even 5. Because you can hammer on the shutter there. And I've always felt this. Don't think about the math in big terms. Let's just say I could rattle off, 12 frames a second in 30 seconds. That's not what I do. It's more of a burst approach. I want increments. So I don't look at 12 frames per second. I've never looked at it that way. It's 1/12 of a second. What am I going to capture in the way the wings are going to move at that 1/12 of a second? The behavior of preening and washing and spinning through the water during the day with long lenses backlit makes for some phenomenal art. Maybe there's a whole book on just washing birds, or birds that are washing their feathers. This was a fun one. I thought I was really cool because the cormorant's wings are out. You know cormorants, right? They're a bird that saturates water through the wings. It doesn't repel water from the wings, so the wings become saturated, so they have to stand out there like this to dry the wings off so they can fly efficiently. So all those little things that I learned. I thought that this was a really aggravated anger situation with one eating the head of the other. They're actually feeding out of each other's bellies. Another animal behavior. What do? I call my friend that runs the zoo down in Miami. What are they doing? And I ask these questions. Again, you'll see a ton of stick pictures and action pictures. And here are the worms. And the good news is when you see them feeding and the water's really down, the tide pools are really down, you'll see them. What do egrets do to kind of shake things up? They move their feet real quick to shake up the waters, get whatever's down there in the mud to kind of kick up or move, and then they can pick it out and they can jab down and try to eat it. That's that. Anybody know the name of that fish other than sad sucker about to be eaten? Silver sides. Thank you for that education. I'm going to check that on Google. Not that I don't trust you, but I have to confirm that Silver sides, everybody remember, yes ma'am, raise your hand. She said silver side. You can stand up, it's okay, because if you're right, you're going to be a hero. If you're wrong, now you're just totally toast. Signets, I love the signets. I love the signets. A part of me wanted to believe that this was a mating ritual, but it's not. It's territory for eating food, and one getting more aggressive than the other. So I'll give you these little nuggets as I go, and you may find, how many photograph birds? How many love this stuff, right? Maybe you can associate with some of this, but you have to learn to be in love with yourself or love being with yourself. Do you agree with me? I want to amen. Yes, I do. Because you are alone a lot. This is where I think a lot. This is where I get lost in my thought. The problem is I start to argue with myself, or I start doing stupid things like, I have to go back into Nikon. I've got to go argue with that boss. So I'll start arguing now, and if I win the argument, then I'm going to win the argument again later on, but it never works out that way. So the conversations with myself just continue to increase. I do sing. Do you ever catch yourself humming? And then you go into bars, notes of your favorite songs? That's what happens. I'm out there, and people are listening, maybe that walk around the path, or they're hearing some dope singing, and I sing to the birds. Have you ever tried this, willing the bird to do something? Come on, move. Can you move to the right? Can you move a little further over? Yo, jackass on the bridge, can you move over to the other side? Because you're blocking my background now. You will things. Have you done this? All right, so I'm not nuts. I'm trying to establish right now that I have not lost it psychologically at all. You do understand that 5 minutes is 5 hours. That is, time is it's not a concept in your brain anymore, because when you do go into that patient zone, all kidding aside, I have missed a lot of dinners. I have not missed any like experiences like my daughter's confirmation or her graduation at Stony Brook recently, so I don't get that deep into it, but there are times you go into a zone and you're just following, and you realize that you've lost all that time. And like I said, patience is the most thing. But you have to be prepared to buy shoes. This is one I learned. How many of you, I'll probably go get those like rubber boots now and waders or something, because when you go into the mud and you lose your flip-flop for the third time, have you ever do that? You take a step in and your foot sinks about 2 feet in, and you realize that flip-flop is not coming out, so maybe I shouldn't have worn the flip-flops today. But this is what most of my shoes look like. Probably another reason why I'm divorced right now. You've done this, but don't laugh at me. You know you've done this before. You stepped in here's enough. If it starts to smell really foul, it's going to get really soft real quick. So the tide is down. You're smelling a lot of fish poop. You're smelling whatever's in that mud, and you go to take that step. It feels like solid ground until the one it doesn't, and that's where you run into it. But this is that same 2x on a 600 millimeter lens. I will say too, because I get this question a lot, is how do I focus? I can only speak within the terminology of the Nikon system, but as we've adopted new technologies, there's two things that I've rolled with right away. Dynamic tracking, dynamic autofocus tracking. What that means is you pick one single sensor and you lock it in on the subject. And then you could choose 8 other sensors, so dynamic 9, 20 other sensors that are actively waiting. The idea is if you come off that subject, the camera's going to find it in one of those other areas. So it gives you a little more leeway. Since then, it's evolved into something called group, where it actually clusters 5 together. So when I've got birds off at a distance, group tracking is the way to go, because now I have a much bigger target to work with. And so continuous focus. When it comes to exposure, if the clouds are consistent, the light's consistent, I'm in manual. Nothing's going to change. You recognize nothing's going to change. Why change it up? Find the best aperture and shutter speed for what you're trying to do and lock it in. However, when there are clouds moving through, aperture priority at the widest opening is where I go. And most times, if I'm in aperture priority, I'll look at the situation. Everybody understand the laws of exposure compensation? What will dark things do to a meter? Overexposed. What will white things do to a meter? Create underexposure, so I compensate within 2/3 of a stop to, at times, maybe a stop and a half to 2 stops. It depends on the situation. I'd rather not wing it, so once I get to that spot, if the light's not changing too quick, I'll immediately jump into manual. Hand holding, try to get shutter speeds of 500th of a second or above. There used to be a 1 over the focal length rule. Do you remember that? That rule still applies, but add 2 shutter speeds to that with digital, especially with higher resolution cameras. So now most action sports photographers are looking to hit 1600th of a second or 2000th of a second just to make sure you're not getting blurry pictures, because pixels are different than the grain of film. It's just a physical fact. But I look for these moments, those studying the behaviors, looking for the opportunities, knowing, and get lucky. You got 2 fish in the same shot. How lucky is that? That's like getting 2 hot dogs for one at Nathan's, I guess. But digging down in, grabbing the fish, coming up, the action of the water, And not being afraid to crop to a square. A lot of times I used to stay with the native format of the cameras, but I crop a little. Nothing more beautiful to me than the egrets landing. Egrets taking off, have you ever photographed that? It's kind of awkward, right? The wings are kind of awkward until they get up in flight. The head kind of locks itself in a little bit. And you know, but the egret coming down, if you have it happening in front of you, it almost starts to happen like it's in slow motion. And when the wings go out, that's, again, one of my favorite times. Sometimes, you get that rubber chicken effect, but another angelic. This was, I think, more of a balance in the water while it was feeding and fishing, and just kind of came up to create a little bit of balance. But I started to learn that reflections in waters work really, really well. And so again, when you get bored and when you think it's going to be another twig in a cormorant, or you find the egret, I kind of just hover there. I'm a stalker. I guess I stalk the egrets. And I just wait for the opportunities and find something fascinating about when they hit the water and plunge in, how everything is just so amazing. I'm going to watch my time. I really want to watch my time here because I am limited. But my challenge is always to just try to get closer and closer and closer. And the birds are not going to walk up to you and feed out of your hands. I mean, these birds, this type of game just doesn't happen that way, so I work really hard. But I will look to work the environment. What am I doing here? I'm just applying the same typical fundamentals of rule of thirds, or positioning of a subject in the direction of a subject, you know, within the landscape, if it's not too crazy. In this picture, I left a little bit of the scatter in the water. A lot of times I may go in and just clone that out just to make it a little easier. I did do a little bit of post-production work here with a D810, again, across the way with a 500 millimeter lens. And it doesn't always have to be the action to create a little bit of impact and energy. That's the metal print that I gave to the gentleman that owned the road. And I said, hang it on your wall. If not, give it to somebody that you love. And now I'll go back and I hope he remembers me. I love, again, following the cygnets. This is the time of year that birds are hatching, that the babies are born. So my daughter called me the other day from like, you got to come down there. There's 6 cygnets. You have to come down there. Out there, the babies. And we get excited about this stuff because you watch the growth and just the little details, the fuzziness of it all. That's where I start to feel a little bit warm and fuzzy. But then the cormorants come back out, and all of this happens in the same day. Different positions. This is a very lucky shot. Again, it's just waiting it out and trying to find that one cormorant that's going to come at me and just come out of the water. So I don't mind the redundancy so much, but never have I shot the same thing in the mouth at the same time, unless the bird doesn't make it to the perch, doesn't land, and comes back and does the same routine, the same flight pattern. So I watch the flight patterns all the time. Is it getting boring to see twigs in the mouth of cormorants? But just try different things. Like that's the granddaddy of sticks. I don't think I've ever shot sticks that way or a branch that way before. He had trouble getting out of the water with that. But how do I change it up? Look for things within the sky, something that breaks it up like trees. You know, there's something called focus tracking with lock-on in the systems that Nikon has, where if you actually set it up, you can lock focus on the subject, and as it rolls through things, it's not going to move to the other thing. You can delay that process from happening so the tracking stays on the subject that you start with. And I try to shoot through the trees all the time, as often as I can. Someone once challenged me, you know, you could do this with all the big stuff. This next shot is with an 80 to 400 zoom on a D5000. And just the cormorants were picking the twigs off of the tree that just happened to be on my side of the lake, which rarely happens. Again, coming out of the water, that was actually the same shot. More twigs, easy to punch through. You do have to stay focused. That's the tough part. This has happened to you before too, I'm guessing. You turn down to look at the camera to see the picture you just made. And you negate or forget that there's something right out there happening in front of you. And all of a sudden, that egret that was sitting there, you can't hear it take off because it's so far away, is gone. That's the worst moment that I have when I'm out there shooting. But you will get a lot of this. You'll take photos, they're feeding, they're going through the tall grass. Just look for opportunities. Maybe this is not the best egret picture in the world, but it's something that I just try to keep adding things that I may not have, even if I have to do it again. Having the ability to go to 12,800 ISO on a D5 or the D4S at 10,000 ISO is a godsend to what I was doing. Afternoons, again, reflections is what I punch. Sometimes the grass isn't pretty, sometimes the twigs aren't pretty. Try to use selective focus to get to the subject. And again, just a simple concept of rule of thirds. But when the light starts to hit and everything comes together, I mean, it just becomes a pleasure. Nothing like try to photograph egrets with high winds. Very tiny, frail body, right? Very light body, gets kicked around in the wind a lot, creates moments and opportunities like that. And then they come back with the twigs. but I love the wingspan of the egret. When I get them overhead and it's somewhat symmetrical is when I love it the most. But every once in a while, a cormorant head will pop out of the water in the lake. We all look at the quality of light. This is where you start to separate snapshots from photographs in my book. When the quality of light is that good, again, here's that backlit subject with the cormorant, light that comes from the side, light that creates fringe lighting, light that just does so many magnificent things like reflections off the water is something I'm always looking for. So find that and discover that. And you'll see that pattern of water moving across the bird's body and look for those opportunities. Well, when the light transilluminates through subjects, but again, the overhead shot. Light from the front is never horrible, right? Especially when the bird has orange eyes or something that'll pop within the photo. This is done with a little cool Pix-A camera, late afternoon. I love when the clouds come in. Again, making that bird a part of the scene, not necessarily the entire part. Great blue, can't get close to them at all. Anybody have a trick for getting close to a great blue? Because I haven't figured that one out yet. Worms? Food? No, bait?
Go to an area that is accustomed to seeing them during the season.
Right.
And then you'll get birds.
Yeah, see, that doesn't happen in Stony Brook, sadly. You know, they won't, but you're right. I guess if they're more, their behavior pattern recognized. Again, the cygnets, the swans, everybody will come right up to the lakeside. And sadly, the people feed them the bread and the crumbs. Take it in. You have to be prepared with gear. I have rain gear in the back of my car every time, because if the rain comes out, the rain will start. There's nothing wrong with having a rainy shot. It just changes things up from some of those bright sunny days. But the weather will change at different times of year. Just loving the quality of light. So that soft light, I guess a good point to make here is you don't have to worry about contrast as much on the cloudy days. You lose the pop of color, but you can work within the parameters of an exposure where you're not worrying about the highlights and the shadows being so far apart from each other. Working strong, working with light, waiting for sunsets. I mean, I'd probably never go home until the sun is gone off the horizon. And even at that, wait through that golden hour just to see if something happens. On that same rainy day you just saw the other day, clouds went away, the sun starts to come out, and you start to get all the beautiful warm. Little fish inside the greenery, whatever, the weed, seaweed, whatever that's under the water. But again, that same rainy day turned into the most beautiful afternoon. And this is what the patient part is all about. This is where we struggle to work. And a lot of times I'm asked about color balance in camera. Some go automatic. I tend, especially shooting rock and roll, go automatic. But within birds, a lot of times I go to cloudy to push a little saturation. If you set the flash setting on your camera, watch how warm everything gets. If you start to combine sRGB with flash white balance, you can really start to saturate the images. Then in picture control, you can boost the saturation even more in what's known as vivid. This is really just a natural sunset with the kick of vivid in picture control that kind of gave that stunning look. The excitement of birds together. This is down in DeSoto Park in Florida. So we were on that same shoot. We bounced around a little bit, royal turns, getting it on. I've seen these pictures before. I also believe in something that everybody should believe. If it's not in your arsenal of images, shoot it. You're not stealing anything. When nature and wildlife is in front of you, it's there. And that's what, to me, it's all about. Picture control. Again, regular standard, just a little bit of punch with vivid changes the day a little bit. So I'll do this in camera if I can. I'll add this in the sky just a little bit to create a little bit more warmth. This is that black and white situation again where I'll play with all different kind of color schemes. So you follow me one more time. I go into monochrome, and within the monochrome setting is a bunch of toning. And I just play with different tonal settings until I see something that I really like. If I can create a real natural looking sunset, I try that in the ambers and the siennas. But I'll go to things like cyan and magenta and just try to create something. This was actually upstate in Jeffersonville, New York. And this is what you come away with. If you love it, great. If you don't, it's a subjective thing. Maybe the yellows work better for you. Maybe the purples work better. But playing with white balance, imagine this. This is the same shot. It was off a place called Block Island out east. Fluorescent white balance. Punching in yellow or something that warms a little bit more and then going to tungsten. And you got 3 different pictures. So play with that a little bit. You see how I work this into the birds. This is what happens regularly. How many of this happens to you? Stark white sky, right? In the middle of the day, I'm creating colors by changing the color temperature or going to black and white and shooting with toning. And all of a sudden, instead of a white stark sky, I've got blue. And deeper into the night, 10,000 ISO with the D4S when it first came out, I was blown away. But I created the blue sky by actually going to tungsten white balance and pushing the cooler picture. I thought this would be a great Nike ad. I can't take that branch out because it looks like a Nike swoosh. But using the blues, changing things up, going to the black and white mode. In this case, just trying to add a bunch of magenta in black and white. So I go to a silhouette, actually adding blue, more cyan, but went to magenta as well. How many knows this about birding? This has to happen to you too. You got to get lucky every once in a while, right? And you wait for this great moment, and the bird poshes like it's going to take off, and you start ramming the shutter, and the bird poops instead. But these are all the cool things that I try to do. This is what I try to investigate with. This is the change up to add the magenta background. It's changing the game a little bit. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Does it work for you? I don't know. But it keeps me from being bored out in the field when I see that I'm trying to create something different. Down in Florida and Hingis at a workshop that I was doing, and just trying to change up again that background. So it's a very simple thing to do, but it's using the camera in a different way. And the point of all this, because I can't teach you everything that's in this crazy head of mine in 45 minutes, is just doing different things that you can try to change up in camera. And of course, I shoot RAW. I don't know how many shoot JPEG versus RAW. JPEG is certainly the economy mode, but RAW is the mode that gives me the out when I leave that area to come back and on the computer change things up or fix things in the mistakes that I've made. So as I close down, I'm studying motion. How many of you photograph birds and can see a bird from a distance, can't recognize the bird, but you figured it out from the speed of the wings? The duck's wings seem to move the fastest, right? Get a lot of nice blur, but you still maintain motion as the duck can fly by. The action, energy of the egret, you've seen that picture before. I love the reflections in water at the motion, high shutter speeds, but this is where it gets really psychotic and crazy. I see shapes, I see people. I see George Washington. And I'm not the first person to ever see this. In fact, I heard other photographers have lectured the same thing, and it's insane, the things that you come up with. But when they wash, when they preen, when they do different things, and they shake off the wings in the water, be ready with high shutter speeds and backlight if you can. The swan, washing. I never realized when they wash, it's so aggressive, they roll, and they come up, and then they shake the water off the wings. And every once in a while, you just keep going. And I love that ice-like look to all of this, just changing the game. And then all of a sudden, the signets are behind when everything settles down and you got the swoosh of a wing. And to me, these are just beautiful moments. Get up in the morning when there's not enough light and you have to go at a 15th or a 30th of a second. Why not pan? I would do that with race cars. Why wouldn't I do that with birds? And I'm not sure I love these pictures yet. I'm trying to figure it all out. But as I continue to work with this stuff, I'll continue to push all of it. I mean, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I've seen worse crap in hotels that probably are making a lot of money for a no offense. If you have pictures in hotels, I'm not looking to offend anybody, Lucas. You got to see his program; he's amazing. But anyway, again, this is art. I've seen this cover art on albums and CDs. It's just different. I guess people react to it differently. And then it gets really subjective as you push it hard. So, think about it. You force yourself to do things. You go out there in the cold. I just got the ducks. Some of the pretty birds go away during the winter. I try to do ice work, and then I realize I'm just not built for this stuff. I like warmth. Hand warmers, foot warmers seem to work better. Try to create those patterns. And as I said, just get excited about doing it somewhere else. And now I hate my friends in Florida for being down there, but this is a place called Blue Cypress, where I've all of a sudden found ospreys. And I love the osprey. And they're out on Long Island. They're harder to find. But Blue Cypress is the most populated area for breeding of osprey in the world. We lost him. There we go. Eye contact, I love that. Listen, nobody ever wants to harm the wildlife. We were boating in an area that was open, but the birds will tell you, stay off. And when they do, I listen, especially when they're flying towards you and the eye contact is still there. But I love the beauty when the wings are open. I love when they grab fish. And again, the backlight again just seems to work for me. Babies, we were just there at the right time when the chicks were coming to this earth. And just landing, and again, one of my favorite pictures, but taking it a step further and going a little bit tighter with the chick underneath the mom's belly in between the legs. And again, sometimes it's about the details and not the overall picture, and just going in super tight to find the eyes. This is with a 500 millimeter f4 with a D5 camera. That's how close you are at this place. It's called Gatorland down south. And this is what I love to do. And I call this voyeur. I title the second shot. This is voyeur. So they know they're getting it on, right? And then there's the other bird in the back, and then they jump on the back. So I've seen these pictures now a lot. So I'm not exclusive to bird kind of whoopee. But when a moment like this happens to me, this is where that moment it clicks hits for me. You see this going, spreads across, no crop, full frame, 500 f4 and a d5, and just making it work. And again, it's all about beautiful moments. And then when really nothing's working, does this work for you? Tell me. I'm doing a survey right now, where you just sort of blow it out and you work with it in the way of refraction. This is my wood duck. I promise you the wood duck. I'll give you the wood duck and some of the newer things. Does this look familiar? It's come up a couple of times. Osprey landing. I mean, just this is what I love to do. Getting to colors. Getting the colors. This is actually photographed in Zoo Miami. I'm sorry if that bothers you. They have an Asian bird exhibit that is unbelievable. And this is actually the feathers of an Asian pigeon. Just beautiful stuff, and I got you through that already. Went down to Ding Darling. How many people have been to Ding Darling? I'm probably the only person down to Ding Darling when there's no birds. Going at the right time of year. And then a more motion just to close out. Love my signets. This cormorant kind of popped its head out of the water. Again, magical things will happen. Is it the greatest bird picture I've ever taken? But the eyes on the cormorant to me were just unbelievable. And that's after the whoopee, I think. I'm making this up. If you know Royal Terns, you tell me if there's actually happiness. I feel like he's happy. Do you feel like he's happy? Maybe it's she. I don't know. I can't. Who knows which is the male and the female here? They do. I'm not looking on it. Yeah, I'll go with the. Can you roll over and show me your bottom? No, it's not going to work that way. So, listen, I think I'm on time. Thank you guys for listening to some of my craziness.